When you hear the words leaking fork seal, your reaction is probably the exact same as the rest of us. Oh, what an expensive and time-consuming repair. But what if I told you it's neither of those things?
Okay, so this is our Pitbull front stand. Picked this up so that way we could do a front head lift on our bikes. There's a 6-pin in here right now. This will lift up a 06 CBR 1000RR. So we're gonna pull that pin out and we're going to replace it with this, I believe this is an S pin. It is the pin made specifically for the 2014 CBR650. So we're going to replace this pin with this one. We're going to put the screw in here to keep it from coming out, and this will adapt the front stand to lift up the 2014 safely. Go. That look pretty centered to you?
Yeah.
Alright. And nothing should be touching anything. We're gonna go ahead and start disassembling the bottom half of the forks. So I'm gonna break loose this 8mm bolt right here that holds on the brake line. There we go, that's loose. And I don't know if the camera can pick this up or not, but you can see like where this fork oil is leaking. It's coming down pretty much directly on top of his brake caliper, and it's going to get on the pads and on the rotors and just immensely dangerous. So I'm glad we're going to be able to get this knocked out. Next, you're going to need a 12mm, and we're going to take loose the caliper itself from the forks. There we go. We're just going to gently pull the caliper off, making sure not to scratch the wheel. I know we never made a YouTube video about this, but we did paint these wheels and get these decals put on it, so best not to scratch up our work. Now, in order not to lose these bolts, I'm going to thread them back into the calipers, so that way, you know, when we go looking for them later, we haven't kicked them across the floor and lose them forever. All right, now that we've made it to this point, we're going to loosen up these pinch bolts. These are also 12mm. And we don't have to take these all the way out, just loosen them up a little bit. And then we're going to crack the 22mm axle nut loose. Got it. Okay, we're good.
Cool.
All right, so a little trick. I'm going to thread this in a couple notches and we're going to hammer out the axle. There's our axle, and here comes our wheel. Again, in order not to lose anything, we're going to thread the axle bolt back into the axle itself. That's the entire bottom assembly of this thing taken apart. So now we're going to just kind of slowly work our way up. We're going to crack a few things loose. We're going to show you the whole process, but yeah, we're off to a pretty good start here. All right, so a quick little tip. Before we get too much further to where the forks aren't being held by anything anymore, they make tools for these that will actually hold the fork in one spot. But we don't have that tool. We're doing this as basic as possible, which will hopefully help you guys out at some point. But at the top of the fork here, you've got these caps. We're going to go ahead and break these caps loose while it's on the bike, so that way when we go to take them off when we got them on the workbench, it's a little bit easier to do. Hope you guys can see this. There's also a little clip at the top of the fork. You have to remove that. Get that off. Don't lose it. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take loose the handlebar here. It's a 12. I'm going to try to sneak in here like this. If not, I may have to just use a good old-fashioned wrench. and I was able to sneak in there. Having a wrench on hand probably wouldn't be the worst idea in the world for these though. But the reason you want to take that clip off is because that's what's holding this on. So once you get that pinch bolt loose, you can pull the handle right off. And as far as alignment goes, this should have a channel that it just sits in, so you shouldn't have to worry about alignment. Yeah, there's a channel right down here at the base that it's going to sit inside of, so you don't have to worry about that. There we go. That's one handle off. I'm going to go ahead and knock the other one loose. A little bit easier to get to. And again, you don't have to take these all the way out, just loosen them. Honda has a factory zip tie right down here that you have to cut. So we're gonna have to grab us a zip tie and zip tie this wiring back on. I believe it's for like all the lighting switches and things like that, but we have to cut that off. And once we have that cut, it's just this bolt right here, and then the lower triple tree bolt that pinches the fork, and then the whole thing should slide out of the bottom. All right, so that's one fork out. So now that Wes has taken loose this top pinch bolt, there's only one more down here at the bottom that's kind of hard to see, but it is simply a 14 millimeter right here at the back, right there. Hopefully you guys can see that. And we're gonna break that loose. And since this is the last one, once the fork starts sliding out, which it's currently doing, that's all you got to do. And this is our trouble fork right here. This is the one that is, the seal is absolutely shot. We got an all balls kit for so this is for a 2014 CBR650F, and the part number is 56-132. So that's the kit we're using. It comes with a brand new fork seal and a dust boot. So we got our dust boot here, oil seal. You're also going to want to pick up your favorite fork oil. For most of you, you don't have a favorite fork oil, so you can go with Motul, Liquid Moly. We are going with Maxima because that's what we could get quick, and a lot of people use this. I've seen a lot of motorsports guys use this, so just pick up whatever. You can use Honda stuff or Yamaha stuff or whatever bike you're working on, but we're going to use this aftermarket stuff, and we should have some good results with it. Got that. Another must-have tool is we've got this Motion Pro 41 millimeter seal driver. This is made specifically for a 41 millimeter fork. This will work on any fork that's 41 millimeters. When I looked up this seal kit, I bought it off RevZilla. If we remember, we'll put it in a link below in the description. But when I looked up this part number that came up for this bike, this seal fit every brand of bike out there. It went all the way from Hondas to Kawasaki's to BMWs and Ducatis. Like if that seal is the same diameter as the fork, it will fit your bike. So also this will work for your bike. That's a must-have. You got to have that, or it's going to be a pain. I've seen people make seals out of PVC pipe you can pick up from Home Depot. I've seen that work. You can go that route. This just makes your job a little bit easier. There's also universal ones of these that you can pick up on Amazon. I've seen people use those on other videos on YouTube, and they work fantastic. This will just make the job a lot easier. It's Motion Pro, it's name brand, so Another very important tool that makes the job super easy. Again, you do not have to have this. You can take some type of measuring apparatus and measure from the base where you get fluid from, and then suction it out another way. But Motion Pro fork oil level tool. So you set your height from the top of the fork to where the oil is, and then you attach this and you suction out the oil until it stops suctioning, and then the fluid is at the exact correct height. You don't have to do anything else. So this makes the job really simple. It's not super expensive, so it's worth picking up if you think you're going to be doing this a few times. So other than that, we also have this, what's this called? A ratio right. I picked this up whenever we picked up the fork oil. It just made measuring it a little bit easier. You don't necessarily have to have this, but we will link the write-up to this in the description as well, so that way you know exactly how much fluid needs to go in the forks. It was more than that, just so you know. So what we read was that you needed 17.1 fluid ounces. It needed more than that, just so you know. So we're gonna get to that. So we're going to get to disassembling this, and we're going to show you guys step by step exactly how to do that. Another couple things, just so you guys are aware, we talked about this earlier in this same video, but you need a 17mm socket to get the end cap off, and also 2000 grit sandpaper. If there's any nicks or burrs on the polished part of the fork itself, you want to make sure you knock that down, because that's probably what caused your seal to fail in the first place, if it did. So first things first, like you guys saw, we'll overlay it here, but we took out this screw from the bottom to bleed out the majority of the old fork oil, that nasty looking stuff. We're at the base of the fork. There is a 6mm at the base that we have to crack loose. It's on there pretty tight. So I'm using a wrench to give me enough leverage to break the bolt loose. Okay, there we go. So now we've got this broken loose, and fluid should start to release. This is terrible. After you get that done, it relieves pressure from everything else. So what you're going to want to do next is you're going to want to get your 17mm, and you're going to want to take the cap off. This is the reason why we knocked this loose while it was still attached to the bike, because if we hadn't, this would be a nightmare right now. It's not under that much pressure, but just keep it in mind that it's going to have some tension coming back. Seal looks good. So this is another thing that you may want to look into getting, is getting this top seal. We couldn't get our hands on one quick enough. It's still very malleable. It wasn't leaking before, so we're going to roll with it. If it becomes an issue in the future, all you have to do is lift the bike up again, make sure the forks are fully extended, which they should. Pop these off, new seal, pop them back on. You shouldn't lose any fluid or anything. Should be really easy to do with it attached to the bike as well. So now that you've got the cap off, you're going to pull out this spacer and try to keep everything clean as well. Put everything in a nice clean area. Make sure your hands are as clean as they can be. So you're going to pull out this spacer. It's just a piece of plastic. Then you're going to pull out this really long spring. Yummy. So the closely coiled section of the spring goes in first. Just keep that in mind. I'm just letting you know here so we don't forget. So now that we're here, there's another section inside of the polished portion of the fork. It's what this screw screws into. It's going to be the last thing that comes out of the polished portion of the fork. So you want to take a small pocket screwdriver. You do not want to put any torque up against the base here. It's not going to cause damage to the point of it not being functional, but it will mar up the finish. But you want to come in here and gently pry up the dust seal, and it will fight you a little bit at first, but once you get the lip of it up, you can just slowly start working around it, and it will get easier. There we go. After that's off, the next part that you're going to want to get out, take your pocket screwdriver, come in here, and there's two little indentations. I'll show you once I get it out. But there's a metal clip that is just a safety retainer for the seal itself. You're just going to come up in here and release it. There's not much spring tension on these at all. There you go. You're going to take both of these and slide them off the end of the fork. There you go. Take your old dust seal and put it to the side. You won't need it again. And put that ring in the safe place. You will reuse that. Knocking these out, kind of like a slide hammer action. Gentlemen, you should be very familiar with this technique. This is the piece that that bolt screws into at the bottom. If it pops out, it pops out. It's no big deal. Just be prepared for it. all there is to it. And then inside the fork tube is a collar that goes on the bottom. So if you order of operations here, this goes on the outside, so we're inside the tube right now. This sits on the outside, just like so. This sits inside the tube, but these two parts are married together at the base, and this is what that bolt on the outside of the fork goes into. It's very important. If you don't have a new crush washer or have this sealed off in some way, it can cause a leak. That's why it's important to replace the crush washer if you can. So now that you have all the parts taken out, just put them in a clean area. Make sure they don't get any hair, or dirt, or dust on them. Now that we have this part apart, you've got 3 pieces here. So all in all, the order here is you've got this retainer clip and this dust boot. So you've got dust boot, clip, seal, washer, and then this copper collar that is sandwiched between the clean polished surface of the inner part of the fork, I guess I'll say, and it sits inside of the inner diameter of the larger part of the fork. So once you pull off the dust seal and then the retainer, you can pull your seal off. Then the washer, and then this collar. It doesn't matter which way this collar goes on, but we're going to put it back in the exact orientation that it came out. So I'm putting the bottom down on the table first. If there's any nicks or burrs on this thing that you can catch with your fingernail, get this sandpaper, really light grit, and just start polishing it, just to make sure that because this is what will make your seal fail. If there's any nicks or burrs, or it gets any dirt between the seal and this sealing surface, that's what's going to cause your fluid to come out. So we're going to make sure that our big shaft here is polished really well. This is the bolt that goes in the lower portion of the fork. It's got something on it. It's some type of sealant. So I don't know if that's something that was put in from the factory. This bike is only a 2014. It's not that old. So I can't imagine that someone's been in here before, but we don't know the full history of the bike, so there's no telling. So considering that it wasn't leaking before, and we don't know if this is factory or not because we can't find any info on it, I'm going to put sealant back on it. I'm going to clean the threads thoroughly, and then I'm going to put a touch of Honda Bond on the threads. Not all of them. I'm going to do like the lower 70%, because I don't want any Honda Bond to get up inside the fork, but I want it to, once it starts to catch, I want it to start to create a sealing surface on there. So we're just giving that copper crush washer that we can't get out a little assistance. Begin the reassembly process. So if this is the point of the video you need, like, this is what you need to pay attention to. So we've gotten everything out, we've cleaned it, and we've checked everything, double checked it. So the first step to this process is you want to take this collar off of this piece. This is the first piece that's going to go in, and it's going to slide it right down to the bottom of the tube, just like so. Next thing is you're going to need your clean and polished fork. You're going to take the base of your fork, you're going to take, I'm going to be completely transparent with you, I have no idea what this is called, but you're going to take like this, I guess, spring assembly, and it's going to go inside the fork, just like so, just like that. And then this is going to sit right on top of that collar, just like so. And then my lovely assistant, this we're having a vise would be really beneficial. And once you have that center, you're going to take your freshly sealed bolt and you're going to begin threading that in. It should thread in fairly easily. And 15 foot-pounds of torque on this, if there's any way possible that you can measure that. Now that you have that done, you don't have to worry about your inner fork tube falling out. It's now retained by that screw. You've made it here. You're pretty close to the home stretch. We've been pleasantly surprised at how easy this fork has been to rebuild. So you're going to take the guide bushing and slide it over the top, and then you're going to place the backup ring on top of it. So now that with the backup ring on top of the bushing, you're going to take your driver tool, and I suggest lubing it up really well. In fact, we're going to take a pause and do that really quickly. To lube this up really well before we slide that tool over the top, we don't want to cause any undue friction on anything. There's no need for it. Luckily, the top of these forks are clear, so you can just take the tool and slide it right over the top. You don't even have to disassemble it. And then we're going to hammer this in. I'm going to use the word gently here, kind of loosely. You want to drive it in. You don't want to break anything. If it's binding up, you want to stop. You don't want to cause any breakage. But you want to kind of hammer it in sternly, not aggressively, but sternly. So you want to kind of drive it home. And you will notice an audible difference once it bottoms out. That literally was textbook. It went right into its home. And that change in noise is the guide seating exactly where it needs to be. Pull your tool back off. So our next step is the seal. Your fork sitting up straight, you're going to notice that with your seal, like many other seals, it's got an open side. We're going to call that the downward side. And then you've got a side that's flat with a shoulder. That's the side that you're going to be driving against. So the seal's going to go on just like this. But just like with the tool, we want to lube up the seal inside and out, so that way when we drive it in, it should go in without any problems. Now obviously there's a bunch of different techniques for installing these seals. Luckily for us, the top of this fork, the outside diameter is actually smaller than the outside diameter of the sealing surface of the fork. So there's an inner lip that you're going to be able to see on the bottom side of the seal that's going to go on first. And you just want to make sure that that inner lip does not fold up. You want to make sure that it goes on straight. It can be a little tricky at first. I've seen some other methods of installing them with some tools or pieces of plastic that can help you make sure that the lip does not fold upward, because that's going to obviously not cause the correct seal. But as long as you're careful and the surface is lubed up nicely, I have found that you can install it properly. So we're going to give it a shot. And I'll say again, with some gentle force, you want to take your seal driver tool, and you can see here, I know it's tough to see through the camera, you can see here that the outside diameter of the tool is pressing on the outside shoulder of the seal perfectly. That's why having the right tool for the job makes this entire process so much easier. So with gentle force, you want to drive this thing until you bottom it out and you can't drive it any further. And again, you kind of hear that change in noise. When the seal is moving, it's kind of got a dull hit whenever you're driving it down. But once it seats all the way and it bottoms out, the noise kind of comes in at a much higher, sharper pitch. And so another way that you can double check is you can look and visually inspect that the seal is below where the retaining clip goes. So I'm gonna take your retainer clip and slide it over the top, just like so. Then you're gonna take your pocket screwdriver, use your fingers to get it in. All this stuff has been lubed up, so you wanna make sure that you got plenty of lube going for you. It's cheap insurance to make sure nothing's gonna get marred up or scratch anything. Then once you've got it inside the top lip, press it down. You'll hear an audible click, just like that. Just make sure that you can spin it around and it's sitting inside of its lip, just like that. And you gotta make sure it's sitting all the way around. Like you'll get the front two pieces in where it's separated. Let's see if I can, yeah. So you can get these front two pieces in, but you need to make sure that you got the back pressed in all the way as well. And then just like with a seal, you want to take your brand new dust boot and lube it up as well, just to make the install of it really, really seamless. Make sure you lube the outside of it where it's going to be putting friction on the inside bore of the lower portion of the fork. And then, just like with the seal, this should actually go on a little bit easier, see? And then you want to, you should be able to put it on, you should be able to put this on by hand, but I don't necessarily trust myself that much, so I'm going to use the seal press tool and just give it a couple gentle smacks. You don't need to really hit this hard. That's it, done. So that's all the way in, and all this does, a lot of people mistake this as the seal. This is not the seal. So these will dry rot and crack. You can get new ones to replace the old ones, but what this does is it keeps dirt, debris, water, all the bad stuff out of the seal to make sure that it stays clean and dry just on the inside of this, so that way it doesn't, you know, wear the seal out in the first place. Wes's dust boots weren't dry rotted, didn't have really any cracks in them, so we're still unsure as to why the seal failed on his forks. But either way, we're at this point now. So once you've made it this far, the extremely difficult stuff, if you want to call it that, is over. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be measuring out exactly how much fluid he needs for this fork, and we're going to be filling it up, and we'll show you that entire process. So according to the manual for this bike, it calls for 17.1 fluid ounces of 10 weight fork oil. So we are going to fill our measuring cup up with about 17 fluid ounces of fork oil, and we're going to fill up the fork without the spring installed. That's very important. You leave the spring out. You don't put anything in it. You leave it exactly as soon as we got done putting the dust boot on. That's all we did. Nothing else is inside the fork. So with the fork totally empty, 17.1 fluid ounces plus or minus 0.08 fluid ounces. So very, very little margin there. But it doesn't matter if you put 16 in it, no big deal. If you put 18 in it, it's really no big deal, because thanks to our fork oil measuring tool here, it's going to take a lot of the guesswork out for us. So really all you're doing right now is filling this up to the point to where it's close, and then we're going to bleed the air out of it, which is super simple. So we've got our about 17.1 to 17.5 fluid ounces in our measuring cup here, and we're going to pour all this straight in. Now that that's done, you want to take your fork tube here and you want to pump it up and down. Now these forks are extremely basic, as we stated earlier. There is no on-the-fly adjustment. So normally if you have an adjuster, you'll have a little, the adjuster will be inside the tube itself, and you can pump that up to help bleed all the air out of that. With this, you just pump the entire tube. And every time I do this, it surprises me at how stiff these things get once they're full of fluid. And I don't know if you can hear this, but you can hear the air bleeding out of it. and you can spin the tube, the polished section of the tube around, or you can spin the base. I mean, whatever's easier for you. And just keep pumping it until you no longer hear air bleeding, you no longer see bubbles, all that. It take a good while to do this, but it's worth doing. Pumped your fork about 100 times. You want to grab your Motion Pro fork oil measuring tool, and this thing is really, really slick. So the metal rod here has got different points of measurements in millimeters, and the book on this says that it needs a gap of 140 millimeters from the top of the fork to the level of the fluid. This is a little locking screw. On here we went up to 140 millimeters. We locked it down. So all we have to do at this point is if there's too much fluid in here, we stick that in, we bottom out the tool, and if there's too much, our suction will just pull any out and it will leave it at the exact perfect level for these forks. If there's not enough, if it's not touching, we add more, and then we just continue that process until we suck out. It doesn't have to suck out a lot, but we get a little bit out and it's at the perfect level every time. So if you've got the budget, definitely get one of these. I don't remember how much it was, but we'll put a link in the description, and from my memory it was affordable. So that's what we're going to do. My lovely assistant is going to step in here and help me, and you want to measure it with this thing bottomed out. You have to remember that this thing has to be completely bottomed out, the spring not in it, nothing in it. So I'm going to hold it for Wes. It's totally flat, and we're pulling fluid. That's it. Now it's at 140 millimeters from the top. So now we're about to make up that space. We're going to pull this up to create a nice air gap, and then with the tightly coiled portion of the spring at the bottom, we're going to thread that in first. Done deal. Then you're going to take your plastic spacer, and the smaller portion at the base, that is going to go inside the coil of the spring. So it will lock itself in just like that, and it will protrude slightly at the top. Then with a little bit of fork oil on the O-ring, you want to replace this O-ring if you can, but if you can't, you're going to put a good bit of oil on this O-ring, and you're going to press it down. It takes a little bit of doing, but you're going to press it down and thread the cap back on. Take your 17 millimeter socket, press it down, and tighten it as much as you can. Okay, so once you've got these as tight as you can get them here, don't worry too much about it, because once we get them back on the bike, we're going to torque these to the proper spec. So the last thing, just so that way we don't forget, we've got the pinch bolt that goes at the bottom here, just so that way we don't lose them. And this is what keeps the axle of the bike in place. I'm going to thread that back in, just so that way, like I said, we don't lose it. And once you've made it to this point, you are now ready to reinstall your forks back onto the bike. I really hope that this portion of the video helped you, but stick around and we're going to see if we can ride this thing this afternoon.